can't help but speak about Islamophobia.
It's time for an honest conversation about Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism in Australia.
So all the homes got broke, blood beneath our feet, but it wasn't my fault.
Not since the Vietnam War have Australian elites in media, government, politics, and across many other institutions been so apparently disconnected from the lived reality of large sections of Australian society. The shell-shock reactions of many of these same elites to the Sydney Harbour Bridge protests illustrate it.
Firstly, it was a massive crowd.
And was an opportunity for people to express their concern about what is happening in Gaza.
Over 100,000 people, and if the weather wasn't appalling, I think it would have even been maybe even double the size.
I think this is a moment, a sort of wake-up call for Australian politics.
There's no doubt there was a massive community demonstration, huge.
There was a lot of Middle Australia there, and I think that's something that can't be ignored.
It's not surprising that so many Australians have been
concerned about the situation in Gaza and had incredible empathy and concern about Palestinian children in particular, but the entire situation.
But as we've argued in multiple videos in this series, this disconnect is not about Israel, Gaza, and the war. Israel, Gaza, and the war highlight the disconnect and make it plain. Not because it's greater in those domains, but because the stakes are greater, the images harder to ignore, their horror making this disconnect so stark. The underlying problem, however, the root of this issue, is the disconnect itself and what it says about the health of our democracy and society. And there is no area of public life where this disconnect is potentially so dangerous as it is in our understanding of Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism in Australia today.
The reality is that Islamophobia in Australia has been persistent, at times ignored, and other times denied.
A big reason for that is that these forms of racism, unlike so many other forms of racism, gets worse the higher you move up the social hierarchy. That's perhaps because many working-class Australians, and certainly many young Australians, have personal relationships with Muslims, Arabs, Levantine Christians, and migrants in the course of their daily lives, as classmates, colleagues, teammates, neighbors, and friends. However, as this video shall demonstrate, some of the best educated, well-traveled, well-read, experienced, and powerful people in this country sometimes sound as if they have never had an authentic conversation with a Muslim or Arab or even Levantine Christian in their entire lives.
Well, the interesting thing is that when you actually speak to migrants...
Which is an excellent thing to do, given that you're the former Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of a nation in which 1 of every 2 Australians is either a migrant or in a family with at least one migrant.
If you use Ubers and taxis, it's impossible not to speak to migrants.
Surely you're not suggesting that for the Liberal and National parties, the voice of first and second generation Australia, remember that's 1 of every 2 households, is mediated via conversations with Uber and taxi drivers? Surely not. Surely not.
Or by fuel,
Or by fuel, very true, very true. So I guess we've got the Uber drivers, the taxi drivers, and the 7-Eleven operators. As a migrant to Australia, I feel seen. All jokes aside, do you see the problem? It's more than just a problem for the Liberal Party's electoral prospects, although it is that. Its consequences are not always funny, as we shall demonstrate in this video.
Are you proud of wearing from the river to the sea? You are! Get Allah!
Let's start with the obvious, the way even the idea of Islamophobia is denied.
The bandying around by the left of terms like Islamophobia. Oh, you're an Islamophobia.
A lot of people in the community tend to just let it go because they're used to it. They see it every day. They hear it every day. They're talking about it.
If and when evidence of Islamophobia presents itself, yes, we should condemn it.
What's the point? Nobody believes us, nobody takes it seriously, nothing will change.
This video is about Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism, about the problem of Islamophobia in elite Australian circles, and about the way that Islamophobia is denied. Not only denied, denied with a vehemence which only reveals how little some of the most important people in this country seem to be talking to their fellow Australians.
Obviously, we welcome the huge Muslim communities we've had in Australia.
We do not doubt Mr. Kennedy's sincerity in saying that.
They're a growing part of our community, and we all have a lot of Muslim friends in this country, regular guests on our program.
But a friend is not just someone you're polite with or get on with. It's someone whose life and perspectives and point of view is of interest to you. It's someone whose story and world makes you curious.
We had a major bomb scare at the largest Muslim school in Queensland, and then following that we had a fake bomb outside a Gold Coast mosque.
But having said that, we have whipped ourselves over Islamophobia since 9/11.
Curious to understand why, for example, Muslim Australians still feel like Islamophobia is a problem.
People are not taking this problem seriously.
Since October the 7th, a tenfold increase in Islamophobic incidents.
Muslim women in particular face the brunt. Many are physically assaulted, spat or shoved, or subjected to sexual threats simply for wearing a headscarf.
All I can see is the back of my truck is on fire.
Even though men like Mr. Kenny believe that just because they don't see it, it can't possibly exist.
He was swearing, I'm going to ban all the Muslims, I'm going to ban the Palestinians.
Officers are yet to establish a motive.
We made an entire video about how this phenomenon can explain everything you need to know about how the Caulfield protests in 2023 and 24 were reported in Australia's media, if you're interested, where a group of protesters gathering in a public park was somehow described in Australian media this way.
These protesters are deliberately going to Jewish areas, intimidating, insulting, and threatening Jewish people in this country.
It was deliberate. In front of a synagogue, there were people there in worship. They had to be evacuated.
They're fellow citizens. It's abhorrent.
Those phrases, violent, mob, thugs, were common across traditional and social media. And the allegation is that they went there intentionally to intimidate and harass Jews. An allegation that was echoed by senior politicians, including Victoria Senator James Patterson and the opposition leader himself.
Very strong statement. The behaviour we saw last night in Caulfield was provocative, it was deliberate, an act of incitement designed to end in violence, and predictably it did.
Melbourne freelance journalist Josh Feldman went even further than that. A mob of Arab and far-left Jew-hating thugs came into the heart of Melbourne's Jewish community and harassed and assaulted Jews outside a synagogue on Shabbat. It's that simple. Now, to be clear, we aren't suggesting that the protesters were criticized for being Muslim, or Arab, or Palestinian. Nobody attacked them for their race or religion explicitly. The claim we make instead, which we'll see play out again and again over the course of this video, is that allegations about their behavior were accepted at face value with very little scrutiny and even less curiosity, and that this absence of curiosity is how our anti-Arab and Islamophobic racism manifests itself. It was because of their race and religion that the simple act of assembling in a public park was described by James McPherson on Sky News this way.
Hundreds of anti-Israel protesters stormed a park across the road from the local synagogue.
Stormed the park? How exactly does Mr. McPherson think these people arrived at Princess Park?
Hold the line!
This is only half in jest. Because watching Sky's coverage of that protest, it's hard to escape the suspicion that these are the images our friends at the Sunday Showdown have in their heads when they visualize what happened that evening. Which means those are the images they put in their viewers' heads. Could that help explain why somebody did this?
A man told a Muslim couple that he would love to kill their 3 children, all who were under the age of 10.
Patricia Karvelas herself wondered whether the mere presence of Arab and Muslim protesters in a place like Caulfield was in and of itself a provocation.
I just want to get some clarity from you, Nasser. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield? I think it's okay to go to Caulfield, it's just part of Australia though.
The thing is, what if they do see it?
Hang on a second, why can't someone be prejudiced against Islam?
What if they see it every day in their lives, but simply don't recognize it?
Aftab Malik says Palestinians feel unsafe in this country expressing their identity.
Because the racist assumptions are so internalized, they don't even recognize them as racist.
That's possibly because their public identity has, for the past 2 years, almost exclusively been about blocking traffic, shouting for the death of Jewish soldiers, and waving banners that would make ASIO twitch.
Here's Australian Senator Dave Sharma, senator of a state with 500,000 Muslims, making claims that would have been easily disputed if he, or at least someone in his office, had taken the time to make sure that they spoke to a wider circle of his own constituents about what is actually going on in Australia.
People have a legitimate right to political protest, but we've seen some of these actions cross the line quite considerably to demonise groups of fellow Australians.
We've got people in our country who are calling Australia home when they don't have Australia in their hearts.
Threaten them, to intimidate them, to menace them.
Tenfold increase since October the 7th, a tenfold increase in Islamophobic incidents.
We've seen Jewish-owned businesses boycotted and defaced.
It is so crispy. Look how burnt it is.
You don't belong here. We're going to boycott you. We're going to close you down. Your shop's going to go.
We've seen chants of death to the Jews and gas the Jews.
I'm not sure if it's the cooking or the smell of burnt children in Gaza.
That is not acceptable in Australia. Doesn't matter what your feelings are on this conflict, that is absolutely not acceptable.
Anyone who is pro-Palestine is a Nazi and deserves to be attacked.
I wasn't aware that there were any anti-Islamic sentiments expressed in Caulfield.
I will be made a shaheed of, which in translation is you'll be made a martyr of, so someone's threatened to kill me.
This episode of Q&A was filmed 72 hours after the Purgatory protest. What is clear is that we aren't talking enough to each other in Australia. If we did, we suspect we'd hear fewer people of the caliber of a Patricia Karvelas, Dave Sharma, or Tony Abbott saying stuff like this.
Australia's democratic solidarity with Israel that matters, not some poorly integrated migrants' religious solidarity with other Muslims.
Can anyone point to any other religion or ethnic group about whom it would be acceptable to suggest a fundamental conflict between their culture and democracy? For those watching outside of Australia, Tony Abbott is a former Prime Minister and Rhodes Scholar.
The great clash, it has to be said, really between the fundamental values of the West and radical Islam in particular.
By the end of this video, we hope to have demonstrated to you that the so-called clash of civilizations is fiction. It's racist fiction. What's more, it's a fiction that poses one of the greatest threats to social cohesion in Australia today. Last year, radio presenter Tom Elliott spoke to Australian Palestine Advocacy Network President Nasser Mashni about the Gaza Solidarity protests. Mr. Elliott was a challenging interviewer who clearly felt the protests had gotten out of hand, which is absolutely his right to believe, and pushed Mr. Mashni to justify them. But then as the interview drew to a close, he threw in this little doozy.
There was a Sydney Islamic leader, and his name escapes me at the moment. He describes Jewish people as the descendants of pigs and monkeys. Do you believe that?
Literally out of left field. Now, the person Mr. Elliott was talking about, and there's no reason why you or even Mr. Mashni would know who it is this bloke, Wissam Haddad. He runs a community center in Bankstown, and every week reportedly gives sermons to about 40 people in this room, during which he said some pretty racist things which do not deserve repeating. The thing is, in the context of Islam, Wissam Haddad is a nobody. He's not an official imam of any mosque. He isn't a mufti. He has no recognized relationship with organized Islam in Australia. He is to Muslims what Brian Houston was to Christians in Australia, except that Brian Houston's congregation was 1,000 times larger and included the Prime Minister himself. Now, the sermon was posted online, but it's safe to say that hardly anyone would have known of its existence but for the fact that Peter Wertheim, co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and Robert Goot, KC, Officer of the Order of Australia, Deputy President of the ECAJ, and Chair of the World Jewish Congress's Policy Council, somehow felt it worth their time, in the midst of a war against antisemitism which they are most certainly losing, for reasons which we explain in a whole separate video, they felt it was worth their time to take Mr. Haddad to court and make him famous. Keep that in mind as you watch the rest of this video. The language that Mr. Wertheim and Goot feel is unacceptable to hear from men like Mr. Haddad, and compare that to the language you shall hear from some other, one might say, more consequential Australians. But back to Tom Elliott. Because whatever you think of Wissam Haddad, Tom Elliott somehow believed it was relevant to Nasser Mashni. Why would that be? Is Mr. Mashni a member of Mr. Haddad's congregation? Not that it matters, but is Mr. Mashni even Muslim? They didn't discuss religion in the interview, and I've never heard Mr. Mashni, whose mother is Christian and who was educated in a Catholic school, by the way, ever discuss his religion. Would Tom Elliott ask a random Catholic guest if he endorses this man's approach to childcare? Cardinal Pell, after all, is the highest-ranking Catholic in Australian history, and who was, at the end of his life, essentially the finance minister for the Vatican State. Cardinal Pell is not a nobody. A few weeks after that interview with Nasser Mashni, Tom Elliott interviewed Rabbi Daniel Rabbit of the Caulfield Hebrew congregation. Why didn't he ask him if he agreed with the views about black people expressed by Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, the highest-ranking rabbinical authority in the Haredi tradition in the world? Like Cardinal Pell, but unlike Wissam Haddad, Rabbi Yosef is not a nobody. Does Tom Elliott agree with every colorful thing said by this man over the years? Legendary investor, businessman, sportsman, statesman, and Hawthorne personality, John Elliott, Tom Elliott's father. Again, like Cardinal Pell and Rabbi Yosef, but unlike Wissam Haddad, John Elliott is not a nobody. We at Analysis would love to have been a fly on the wall in the 3AW control room as that interview with Nasser Mashni came to a close.
All right, you've been doing great so far. Just some layup questions ahead, and let's bring this home.
Absolutely, Tom. You were hard, serious, and took no BS. Exactly what our audience loves about you, mate. Maybe let's finish off with something lighthearted. A personal question or a joke, just to set the right mood to leave with the audience. Tom? Did you hear that, Tom? Tom, can you roger that?
Yeah, yes. The answer's yes.
Tom, we're having trouble reading your expression. Can you roger that, please?
Yes. The only answer is yes.
Let's finish up with something lighthearted and nice.
There was a Sydney Islamic leader.
No way.
And his name escapes me at the moment.
What does he talk? What does he talk?
He describes Jewish people as the descendants of pigs and monkeys. Do you believe that?
Okay. A little weird. Don't know where that came from, Tom, but let's not panic, everyone. Let's just let the man answer the question, thank him for his frankness, and wrap it up.
Absolutely not.
Great.
Yes, great. Okay, Tom, now just say something gracious to bring it in. Tom, something gracious.
Right. Well, he says it.
Fuck. He says it. After asking him such a crazy question, and then getting such a polite response, that's how the interview ends, with Tom Elliott, scion of one of Victoria's most eminent families, telling Nasser Mashni, in fact, telling every Muslim and Levantine Australian of whatever religion, don't bother even explaining yourself. We've got our story, and we're sticking with it.
I ain't done this, but has any of you actually ever read a book?
Now, my friends, if that's not deeply entrenched, institutionally accepted racism, what is it? Mr. Mashni's Palestinian identity is so toxic in this country that a single meeting with Penny Wong merited this slanderous condemnation from Sky News, who suggested he was somehow a Hamas terrorist.
Have a look. Exactly who Penny Wong has given credibility to by posing in photographs with him and meeting him in her office. It's the head of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, Nasser Mashni. Penny Wong, Australia's foreign minister, gives credibility to this despicable character.
An article about the Bibas children in The Australian was advertised with references to the, quote, gorillas of Gaza and, quote, black-hearted Arabs. There is no other group in Australia for whom such racist discourse is so deeply embedded in the conversation, and especially in elite conversation, that we don't even notice it. Wentworth politician, businessman, and media personality Daniel Lewkovitz, expert on radicalism, is a perfect illustration of the privileges one enjoys when one says outrageous things about people for whom it is acceptable in our society to say outrageous things, as we discussed in a previous video. As we said in that video, we don't know Mr. Lewkovitz and make no representation about his character. However, we invite any Australian to peruse his X account, which, we'll admit, we find breathtakingly offensive, and wonder if it would be possible for any Australian to maintain the place in our society that Mr. Lewkovitz maintains if the target of his particular sense of humor were anyone other than Arabs and Muslims. Just as with the story of Tom Elliott, this is a comment on us, not on Mr. Lewkovitz. We aren't calling for anyone to be cancelled, and we stand by Mr. Lewkovitz's right to express himself. We simply note that millions of highly intelligent Australians do not find his statements about Muslims racist or offensive, even though they would trigger a national conversation were someone of his status to say any of the exact same things about anyone else, and certainly about Jews. Mr. Lewkovitz is entitled to engage in the free marketplace of ideas. We stand by his right to engage in the debate about Israel, Zionism, and Gaza. He has the right to be as persuasive and compelling, making the arguments, as he is able to be. If we were giving him advice, we'd suggest he might be a more compelling advocate for Israel if he maybe gave it a rest with the jokes involving violence against women.
She picked the wrong vehicle to stand in front of.
And of course, the most important thing is, be authentic. Be yourself. That's the key. And also, hopefully resolve whatever this was all about amicably. Now, you might say, that's just talk radio or Sky News. Nobody takes them seriously. Even if Mr. Elliott does have a degree from Oxford. Okay, let's consider what is presumably the other end of the intellectual spectrum in conservative Australia. The Australian conservative journal Quillette. If there is one place we should expect high intellectual standards of discourse, it is here. An online publication that many consider to be a source of high-quality conservative writing, perhaps something like The Conversation, but for the right. Consider this interview with Dan Scheuftan, advisor to Israel's National Security Council, to former Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Ariel Sharon, and a respected figure at Israel's security establishment, which says a lot about that establishment.
Palestinians don't have a constructive bone in their national body.
We don't criticize Quillette for interviewing Dr. Scheuftan. That's journalism, and we accept that journalists should talk to all kinds of people. But nothing required Ms. Lehman to pick out this particular statement and headline it in the interview thumbnail, presumably thinking that this is the sort of insight that her audience would find most interesting. And also, let's be honest, perhaps because this is how Ms. Lehman herself and all of her staff also see Palestinians. We don't know the woman and are not making any assertions about anyone's character. But can you imagine a newspaper editor of her stature associating herself with conjectures about what is or isn't inside the bone of the, I don't know, the Jewish national body, or the First Nations national body, or the Chinese national body?
This is the essence of Palestinian culture.
And the only people that say otherwise are spiritually Jewish or actually Jewish.
Palestinian culture is terrorism and then some.
The only people that their hearts are so hardened to the suffering of others that they could say there's a virtue in hating those people.
That's Palestinian culture. That's what they have.
To be clear, we don't endorse any of these statements, and also, to be equally clear, we aren't calling for either of these men to be cancelled, however we define that term. Because as a matter of principle, which we hope viewers of this series will have recognized by now, we don't believe in canceling people. However, once again, this does say something about us, that only one of these two men has actually been canceled, and it wasn't the man advocating ethnic cleansing. What's worse, the interviewer isn't some pro-Israel troll or cable news provocateur, but Harvard researcher Pamela Peresky, who is a collaborator with Steven Pinker, an intellectual hero of mine, and whose ideas about humanity and human nature are so at odds with the sentiment expressed in this interview, and seemingly endorsed by Ms. Peresky, that we honestly wonder how they got along.
They're also good in whining, okay? This is their favorite whine is, we've been wronged, we are victims. You know, they shoot you and then they say, oh, I'm a victim. I can decapitate children because I'm a victim. Okay. If anybody wants to buy it, he should study in Harvard. Sorry.
Ms. Peresky, laughing at jokes like this, is presumably the kind of woman at Harvard who feels unsafe at Harvard, where a quarter of the faculty are Jewish, 4 of the 5 presidents were Jewish, and a very large number of students, including plenty of protesters, are Jewish. Finally, in what is perhaps the greatest and most breathtaking example of our deeply embedded racism. A racism that we don't recognize simply because it is so ever present throughout all segments of our society, from the very top of the social hierarchy to the very bottom, so totally internalized by so many of us that we don't even see it as racist. That is the story we tell ourselves, without evidence or even curiosity about Hamas human shields, what we call the mother of all blood libels.
The Hamas is in violation of international law, hiding behind children, hiding in schools, hiding in UN compounds, hiding in hospitals. They commit double war crimes by shooting at Israeli children from behind Palestinian children.
That's the former Secretary General of the World Jewish Congress, New York-born and Harvard-educated Dan Diker, saying something we've heard all our lives, yet for which none of us, and probably including Dan Diker himself, have ever actually seen any photographic or video evidence. What's more, there's a good chance that if you're watching this in the West, it may have never even occurred to you to even wonder about the evidence, or why no journalist has ever sought it. We call it the mother of all blood libels because, as we discussed in another video, just like the medieval blood libel that triggered the Kishinev pogrom, it involved the baseless but amygdala hijacking claim about the murder of children, claim which runs counter to common sense. After all, humans don't ordinarily murder children. We have highly evolved Homo sapien instincts that fight against that. But also, in the specific case of medieval blood libel, against the most basic tenets of Jewish culinary practices which forbid, among other things, the use of blood protein to enrich flour. It's not kosher, something we Gentiles have always done, which is why the blood libel made sense to our medieval Christian ancestors. That's how we Gentiles get delicious foods like blutwurst, black pudding, and boudin noir, which you will never find if you've ever thought to ask at your local Jewish deli. So it was always absurd. But this, in our opinion, is worse than that. Because while medieval blood libel was a baseless claim about one group of Homo sapiens killing the children from another tribe, this is a claim about a group of Homo sapiens killing their own children. We don't know how anyone can have contempt for the illiterate, superstitious European peasants who believed antisemitic blood libel on the one hand, while we, with all our access to information and knowledge and historical wisdom, accept claims about Hamas using the children of their own community as sacrificial instruments of war, at least without demanding to see evidence. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever met anyone who would do that to their own children? I'm not talking about a spasm of despair or defiance, mediated by narcotic sedation like the Jonestown mass suicide or the mass suicides at Masada and many other examples in history. We're talking about an allegation of a 30-year sustained strategy of taking babies from the arms of their mums and sacrificing them in war. Really? We think that any organization can get away with doing that for 30 years? Forget Homo sapiens. Can you name any mammal that would do that? Ask your dog breeder. How long would it take you to create a breed of dogs in which females allow males to consume their own pups? Dogs. The dog breeder will probably look at you like you're crazy and tell you that there are certain things that even science can't overcome. And one of those is millions of years of evolved mammalian instinct. That's what any dog breeder would tell you about dogs. And someone tells us that people, human beings, do that and we just believe it? Without evidence? Without even asking for evidence? Open up your browser right now. Do an image search on Palestinian human shields or whatever equivalent phrase you want to see. What do you see? I know what you see. I know because I first did this search 24 years ago when Google image search was first unveiled, purely out of curiosity. Because even in 2001, the claim about Palestinians being used as human shields by their own people was a claim I'd heard all my life. I didn't find a photo then, and I've never found a photo since, even though I've been doing this search regularly. So I know what you'll see. But don't take my word for it, do it yourself. What you will see are plenty of links to stories about human shields and speeches about human shields, and maybe even graphic illustrations of human shields, but no photographic or video evidence of a Hamas militant with a baby strapped to their chest or standing behind women firing at soldiers, as so many people claim. Remember, Palestinians are probably the most surveilled people in the history of the world. They're being photographed everywhere, from fixed cameras, body cams on soldiers, from satellites, spy planes, probably in many cases their own hacked phones. Yet despite all that, you will not find a single photo in 50 years.
Yes, this incident has been shocking. The testimony of Mujahid is very difficult. The pain is ongoing now.
What you will see is dozens of images of Israeli soldiers using Palestinians as human shields, a practice that has been documented for decades, in this case with ample photographic evidence by sources inside Israel and around the world. The point here is not to talk about Israel. The point is to talk about us. What is it that we are prepared to believe without evidence, and what does that say about our assumptions, about our priors, and about our racist beliefs about our fellow Australians?
There's so much attention on Israel. They don't want to commit war crimes. They really don't.
Do we know that,
sadly,
though, Deborah?
Do we know that? Well, I mean, I listened to the IDF spokesman.
Patricia Karvelas, a journalist whom we admire for her punchy and courageous style, but whom we have also criticized in this series, is one of the few journalists in Australia who does do pushback on questions like these. We covered the story of Deborah Conaway in a prior video, so we won't rehash it here. She and her husband Willie are both wonderful Melbourne artists. We don't want to see them or anybody get cancelled for things they say, especially since at the end of the day, they're just folk singers. They aren't geopolitical analysts. Ms. Karvelas, by contrast, is one of the highest-ranking journalists in Australia. Curiosity is supposed to be a core competence of her profession. And on top of all that, she's Greek, so curiosity is supposed to be embedded in her cultural DNA. At least that's the story my mom always told me, and I'm sticking with it. Shouldn't Ms. Karvelas have more to say when Ms. Conway says,
I said they seem to be happy that when the IDF responds, that if a few of their own civilians are killed, that makes terrific press.
But since the Palestinians want us to kill their children...
And I started to hear these talking points and I was thinking, like, these are not even arguments. Have you ever looked into the international law about human shields?
Hamas have embedded themselves in such a way to use the Palestinians as human shields for their operation.
You have a group of people coming out of a civilian building with their hands up, and from their midst come a bunch of Hamas terrorists firing at you.
What so upset me was that I felt like I was constantly confronted with people who in so many parts of their lives were smart and thoughtful and empathetic and decent. And on this question, it was like a wall just came down.
There are a lot of young people dying, but I believe that the responsibility for that lies pretty squarely with Hamas, who have embedded themselves in the civilian population.
Do you really believe that international law suggests that because you think there are a couple of fighters there, you can take down a hospital or an apartment building?
In the hope that the IDF will fire back at the civilians.
They want the pictures of their children killed so that they can use public opinion against Israel.
Because if that's the way international law worked, what about all the apartment buildings in Tel Aviv where Israeli generals live?
This is how Jewish Americans are justifying, well, Hamas uses people as human shields. Like, they'll say things like that. Like, the way you can justify mass murder.
It's nonsense to say that you don't have to care about civilians because you think there are fighters there.
We can try to minimize it, but you cannot avoid it altogether.
These felt to me like defense mechanisms, like things people said so they didn't have to feel anything.
I don't think people should be coming in from that war zone at all at the moment. It's not prudent to do so, and I think it puts our national security at risk.
I do agree with a ban on those coming in from Gaza.
Of course, when they say people from that war zone, what they mean is civilians trying to flee. They are not referring to the soldiers accused of war crimes, despite the fact that the legal jeopardy they will likely carry with them for the rest of their lives would come with them to Australia. The opposition leader knows full well that we have processes to vet refugees, whether they are Gazan Palestinians, white Rhodesians, or IDF soldiers. And if our processes are not rigorous enough, As former Home Affairs Minister, he's had plenty of time to strengthen them.
So we have large numbers of barbarians inside our gates. That's the reality.
Who's he talking about? Football hooligans? Or the governing elites of his own political coalition?
The unravelling of too clever political management, and of course, a masturbatory offence against a piece of furniture.
Let's just remember that this was the last coalition government, and he's worried about barbarians migrating to our society.
Thousands, tens of thousands, but probably hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who have no love at all for the UK, but yet live here.
Jews refuse to assimilate. They're so powerful. They're so tribalistic. They're loyal to each other. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
I don't want them to live here. I don't want them here.
Is there any other group about which that would be acceptable to say?
And at some point, America's going to have to confront it. We have a Jewish problem.
As we've said, we obviously do not endorse any of the views you've heard, which we believe are all racist. However, it is an awkward and embarrassing fact about our society that of all the voices expressing what we believe to be racist ideas that you have heard or have yet to hear in this video, only one has been cancelled by our society, almost surely would never receive a travel visa to visit this country, and would be deemed an unacceptable interlocutor in any respectable media platform in this country, is the one who does not advocate ethnic cleansing, or vocalize what sounds to us like a pogrom fantasy.
Almost 2 million Muslims are being moved by the Pakistani authorities into Afghanistan. Okay, we have a very large Pakistani community here in the UK. If their country of origin can do that, why can't we?
Because we aren't Pakistan? Because not ethnically cleansing is what we at Neosis believe is one of those, what's the term?
The fundamental values of the West.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
I'm plainly Christian in terms of my personal convictions.
Perhaps that's one answer to Murray's question about why we can't just do to minorities what the Pakistanis do.
There are a lot of people who don't personally believe, have personally come to the view there's no God or they don't believe in the Christian God, but are able to see intellectually the unbelievable importance of Christianity to what Churchill, I think, as a non-believer, would have called the benefits of civilisational Christianity.
If revulsion at the suggestion of mass ethnic cleansing isn't one of those benefits, then what is? Organ music?
Is it time to send in the army at some point? Probably yes. But if the army will not be sent in, then the public will have to go in, and the public will have to sort this out themselves. And it'll be very, very brutal.
In any case, whatever they might be, we're pretty certain Jesus never said anything that sounds remotely like this about anyone. Not the Samaritans, not the Amalekites, not even the Romans. Is there any other group of Australians for whom one could suggest, even as a thought experiment, the army or public, whatever that means, rounding them up and sorting it out very brutally, saying all that on camera directly in front of the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia?
I have never argued anything close to that. I've never made the argument that we should ethnically cleanse blacks from the United States.
We aren't lawyers, but this sounds uncomfortably close to the kind of hate speech that now attracts a mandatory prison sentence in Australia.
Is it time to send in the army at some point? Probably yes. But if the army will not be sent in, then the public will have to go in.
Although Mr. Murray spoke those words in London, the conversation has been broadcast to Australia, remains visible and popular on Mr. Anderson's podcast, and Mr. Murray frequently visits this country on a travel visa. We really need to stress this point, because this ain't no Wissam Haddad and his 40 Uber drivers we're talking about. We are talking about the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson, AC. Imagine living in a country where senior politicians can say such things about people simply because they share your ethnicity.
Yeah, maybe I'm racist. Maybe we disagree on issues of race, but I'm against murder. I'm against genocide.
Imagine knowing that the people who think this way aren't just white supremacists working in an auto body shop or out on a farm somewhere, but people who occupy the most senior positions in control of the army, the security services, intelligence, the police, the courts, government, corporate institutions, boards, schools. You get the idea.
And they have come here. They have betrayed all of our attempts at hospitality. They've spat in our faces, and now they want to trample everything we have underfoot. No. No.
Douglas, thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your courage.
It's a pleasure.
The very fact that we are having this conversation is evidence of Peter Beinert's point, that anti-Palestinian and, frankly, anti-Arab and Islamophobic racism is so prevalent, so deeply entrenched in our worldview that we don't even notice it. It's like water for fish.
This is completely unacceptable, and for so many of us, it's reminiscent of those years in the 1930s leading up to the Second World War and the tragedy of the Holocaust, and they should not be acceptable here in the 2020s.
If someone shouting Free Palestine makes you fearful, have you considered what it must feel like to be a first-generation Arab Muslim in Australia? If there's one group of Australians who genuinely have the right to fear echoes of the 1930s, it is Muslim migrants to this country.
I mean, real Islamophobia would be a terrible and unwarranted thing.
The recent New South Wales anti-hate speech laws explicitly exclude Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism.
Courts have interpreted race as extending to Jews and Sikhs, but not Muslims.
Which means it's acceptable in New South Wales to suggest bulldozing mosques as a means of building social cohesion, but potentially illegal to suggest that Palestinians should have full equality in Israel.
Why is there a difference?
Ain't it hypocritical?
The issues in relation to hate speech laws for other offences are, to be really frank with you and honest, far more difficult to codify.
Perhaps Naosis could be of assistance? One way to get started is to find some other codified definition of racism and just use that as a template. Does anyone have a good definition handy?
Well, I think the best definition is the one that's been internationally accepted.
We love international best practices at Naosis.
And that has been accepted by the Australian government and opposition, which is the IHRA definition.
What a coincidence, we were just talking about that definition and have a copy right here. Can someone get someone on the team to mark up a version just copy-pasting references to Jews with relevant references to Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians? First pass. That's all we need.
I couldn't resist.
We've got people in our country who are calling Australia home when they don't have Australia in their heart.
Anti-Semitism may be ingrained in the cultural fabric of certain segments of our society.
We've got people in our country who hate our country.
Now that's what we would call a certain perception. But that's just the definition. Perhaps it's too abstract. Does anyone know how we might craft some examples to serve as illustrations? What do you know? IHRA have those too.
And the public will have to sort this out themselves. And it'll be very, very brutal.
Poorly integrated migrants' religious solidarity with other Muslims.
They hate us, they hate our values, they hate what we stand for.
Don't want to integrate.
I just wonder how much sympathy can be extended to the Palestinian people. Can they really be excused for blame for what they've bring on themselves? Or am I being unfair?
No, I don't think they can be.
We shouldn't use cliches like ethnic cleansing and transfer of population.
At least 40 babies were killed. Some of them, their heads cut off. He said he's never seen acts of brutality like this.
They cut heads off children. Mothers and children, and yes, they cut off heads. They cut off heads.
Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
Stomach turning reports of babies being killed.
Babies and adults decapitated.
Hamas and their friends are Nazis, and we'll have to get rid of them.
When the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds.
I would do everything in order to achieve my liberty, and that's it.
When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
I slap this dick day round cause the teeth when the puppy sing big when about it. I
I were born Palestinian, I probably would have joined one of the terror organizations.
I will never tell a person in Gaza you don't have the right. Maybe for all I know, the Warsaw Ghetto, they were using indiscriminate weapons. Who the hell knows and who the hell cares?
Perhaps I know more about you than your institution, than you know about me. And perhaps I have a judgment on them. Every white man knows that he would not himself allow his child to be sold from him. He would not himself allow himself not to have the autonomy of his own house and his own woman. We all know that.
Just over a century ago, Sir John Monash bragged to a reporter that Australia does not have a Jewish question. We still don't, and we are a long way from that. But too many Australians, in our view, are uncomfortably close to entertaining the kind of discourse that, if we let it run, one day might become our Muslim question. And even if we never get there, we've already shown our hand in a very unfortunate way. As we explained in a prior video, blood libel works because people are predisposed to believe it. And because its purpose is to trigger the amygdala and start that pogrom, the actual truth or falseness of the underlying story is irrelevant. Consider again the story of the Kishinev pogrom, which we discussed in that earlier video, when 49 Jews were murdered at an orgy of violence triggered by the belief that the murder of 14-year-old Mikhail Rybachenko, a Christian boy, was somehow tied to rituals carried out by the Jews of Kishinev over Passover in 1903. If someday some historical researcher or forensic scientist discovers, for example, that Michael Rybachenko was killed in a gangland shooting,
That's the name off the list, Alfie. Did I?
between some Ukrainian gang and some Bessarabian Alfie Solomon,
What's the matter with you, Tommy, eh? Thought they took your boy, did they? Eh? You got your boy?
would that change anything? Does it make the blood libel that started the Kishinev pogrom any less blood libelous? Does it change what we now know the motivations were? Does it change history's judgment of Pavel Khrushchev, the man who, like Sheryl Sandberg, did more than anyone else to spread an amygdala hijacking story, which he may very well believed was true, but which he also must have known he did not have the evidence to be sure was true?
I do think that it took longer than it should have for people to come out and to decry this sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
That statement sounds different now, doesn't it? Now that we know what she did not know when she said that. Now that we know that she, like many other people, simply took someone's word.
With regard to the 7th of October attacks, we found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred in at least 3 locations.
That's the part of Pramila Paten's testimony that you will have seen hundreds of times. Yet the statement is trivial. Of course, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred. Conflict-related sexual violence is so common in our world that there would be grounds to believe it even if there had not been a single claim made. Just as there are reasonable grounds to believe that sexual harassment in elite private schools occurs, even if you don't have any specific allegation to talk about. Chanel Condos' research has quantified just how prevalent it is. Yet when the ABC disclosed information about a very specific allegation from a very specific named individual, testifying herself in her own name in a sworn deposition, an entire media and political establishment felt it was an assault on civilization that someone would even tell you about it.
Now, what grubs they are at the ABC and what grubs the ALP are to recklessly destroy a man's character or reputation on the flimsiest of evidence. Evidence it knew would never stand up in any court of law.
Remember that nobody was calling for Mr. Porter to be taken to court. No one was calling for him to be assassinated or his political allies to be killed. Nobody suggested that the city where he is from should be surrounded, cut off from food, water, medicine, and fuel so that justice be done. Nobody was trying to start a war on the basis of these allegations. The ABC simply thought it was a matter of public interest that these allegations were made and that the police declined to investigate them. The motivating question wasn't Mr. Porter's guilt or innocence, and we, like all Australians, affirm that Mr. Porter deserves the presumption of innocence. But the question of who in Australia is entitled to even be taken seriously.
In other locations, such as Kibbutz Kfar Aza, reported incidents of rape could not be verified.
The material takeaway of Pramila Paten's investigation is not that allegations are credible, because they are by definition credible unless falsified, as was the case with the allegation of beheaded babies, or of babies put in ovens, or of a woman whose breast was severed before she was raped. The material takeaway is that not one single allegation was substantiated in Pramila Paten's investigation. That doesn't mean they weren't true. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. You can't prove a negative. It doesn't mean the witnesses were all liars, or that even one witness was a liar. Although Ms. Sandberg seems to have had particularly bad luck in her choice of whom to highlight in her documentary. It certainly doesn't mean that the testimony of former hostages like Amit Susana, who testified to sexual assault while in captivity, should be disbelieved. But it certainly means that serious people should not talk about allegations that are, at any given moment, indistinguishable from war propaganda, as if they were facts which they knew to be true.
This sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
Because if we are prepared to do that, then what's the difference between us and the mobs of Kishinev? Did they not have a right to defend themselves? What would you do if you were convinced that an alien community was part of a death cult that educated their people to abduct and kill your children? If your answer to that question is any other than, I would really want to make sure it was true before I believed it, and certainly before I spread the allegation, then there is no difference between us and them.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
I had just turned 20 when I saw Nayira Al-Sabeh's emotional testimony about Iraqi soldiers. And like most people who were alive then, I absolutely believed it. I believed it because she seemed credible. I believed it because it was the kind of thing I was too young to realize people tell lies about, especially when trying to drum up support for a war. But mostly, I believed it because what she said was the kind of thing I imagined Iraqi men might do. It's unclear why. I had never at that point met anyone from Iraq. I had no basis to believe such a thing. But in my mind, in 1990, the idea of an Iraqi soldier grinning from cheek to cheek, taking a baby out of an incubator and laying him on the ground to die was totally consistent with what I understood about the world. And what I also remember was the rage. The rage I felt when I contemplated that picture. That, my friends, is how Blood Libel works.
One of the most important parts of journalism when it comes to war is to scrutinize propaganda that comes from every side in every war.
Facts are stubborn things.
The reporting by the New York Times on the alleged mass rape used by Hamas was so bad that they had to cancel a podcast that they were going to do about it.
There was no forensic evidence.
There's no forensic physical evidence. There's no audiovisual evidence.
There was so little to back it up.
Pramila Paten said, we looked at 50 hours of video.
What was necessary was for Israel not to just accurately describe the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, and there were absolutely atrocities on October 7th.
There was body cam, iPhone, 50 hours.
But that wasn't enough. Knowing what the Israelis intended to do in Gaza, they needed the world to believe that this was not just an ordinary attack, that this was done by a kind of evil we had never seen before. Remember, they were describing them as worse than Nazis.
We looked at 5,000 photographs.
Worse than ISIS.
We have no digital or photographic evidence of sexual violence. Those are her words.
The only so-called evidence comes from discredited witnesses.
The only way the Israelis could, and they knew this at the time, justify in people's minds what they were doing and knew they were going to do to Gaza, namely destroy it all.
Gang rapes to the left of me. Gang rapes to the right of me.
Was if they could convince people that the people in Gaza were not really human beings, that they were subhuman.
We're civilized people. We are not like them.
And that's how the Israelis spoke about them from the very beginning.
There's only people who claim claimed they saw something.
The alleged witnesses, they said they were hiding.
And if you look at their stories, none of them add up. We've gone over this so many times.
You didn't take out a camera?
And of all the Israeli women who were raped that morning,
there's no identified victims, dead or alive.
Much of the international community does not want to listen to them at all, and certainly doesn't want to believe them.
There's no identified victims.
Well, let me tell you where the victims are. They're dead. They're dead. That is why we called this film, Screams Before Silence.
So name one of them. Name one of these dead victims. The one dead person who was named as a likely victim of Hamas rape was Gal Abdush. Her family denounced the New York Times. They spoke to her right before she was killed and said it was impossible that she was a victim of sexual violence. So if not her, then who?
You're talking about the Sharabi girls, she said. No, they were shot and were not subjected to sexual abuse. The spokesperson also disputed the graphic and highly detailed claims of the Israeli Special Forces paramedic who served as the source of the allegation.
There were no cutting babies out of wombs. There were no baking babies in ovens. These were all absolute lies spread by the Israeli government and their supporters.
Quote, it's not true. They were not sexually abused.
That's what they do.
And the extreme suffering you're about to hear about, including the killing of children, these are not really human beings. These are monsters and mongrels and subhuman.
They have never built anything except something to kill Jews.
And all of these fabricated stories were necessary to do that.
The one thing Israelis are frightened more than anything else, that we become like the Palestinians.
Just like war propaganda of this kind always is designed to accomplish.
They come from a different universe in terms of their values than we do. They're not a version of us.
It's just such an embarrassment. It's just such a complete embarrassment for them.
It's also an embarrassment for an entire generation of Western liberal feminists who allowed themselves to be tricked into using the language of feminism like a spoonful of sugar to help the racism go down.
I do think that it took longer than it should have.
If you get to the point where you've let people lose your humanity, relinquish your humanity,
for people to come out and to decry,
cheer for some of the most grotesque acts that human beings are capable of imposing on others, including entire populations of women and children.
The silence on this from too many is deafening.
Now, on the other hand, you have countless stories and allegations of Israelis raping Palestinians.
This sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
We have come so far in believing survivors of rape and assault in so many situations.
That got totally ignored.
Anyone with a mother, a sister, a daughter must speak out now to condemn rape.
Then I would suggest that you need to seriously reconsider what it is that you have been led to support.
The number one weapon of the barbarian is our values and the dumb application of our values.
Archbishop Peter Comensoli, the leader of the Catholic Church in Melbourne, suggests that anti-Semitism may be ingrained in the cultural fabric of certain segments of our society.
With the greatest respect to His Grace the Archbishop, that's a remarkably unself-aware and unhistorically aware statement for a Roman Catholic prelate to make. It's a remarkably unself-aware and unhistorically aware statement for any Australian named Comensoli to make.
Your people, we're your people!
You're my people!
Yes, we're your people.
Run with the Dagels! They've ruined this town!
Or for an Australian named Frydenberg to repeat. Whilst anti-Zionism is obviously prevalent in the Muslim community, just as it is prevalent among young people and increasingly prevalent among young progressive Jewish people, that has nothing to do with some ancient prejudice deeply ingrained.
It's an ancient hatred, perhaps the most ancient among the monotheisms. And we've imported it.
Socrates would ask questions.
Like, for example, are we sure about that? From where would such an ancient hatred emanate? Was it somehow adaptive to our paleo ancestors? Like that craving for carbs with which we all struggle? We have an entire video in which we discuss different theories and mental models of anti-Semitism. But for now, let's just acknowledge that it is indeed very old in Christian history, i.e. in European history.
You have to wrap your mind around the idea, which is a huge idea.
For these reasons, Barry Weiss is justified in saying, obviously metaphorically, that
anti-Semitism is built into the scaffolding of Western civilization.
The thing is,
it's not the only phobia and hate which one could argue is embedded in the DNA of Western civilization. Turns out there are other phobias which, over the course of our history, are many orders of magnitude more significant and terrifying in Christian imagination than the presence of Jews. At the top of that list, ahead of Vikings or the Black Death, or witches or anything else, including Judaism and Jews, one would have to say is our existential dread of the people we called Sarakini, or Saracens. That probably sounds like an exaggeration for most people today, but that's just recency bias. Over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries, that dread was replaced with fascination, including plenty of erotic fascination, which then gave way to racist disregard and contempt in the late 19th and 20th centuries.
Would the history of Christianity been more bloody or less bloody if Jesus had been more like Muhammad?
We have no idea. But if we're going to talk about civilizational DNA and the architecture of Western civilization, and make assertions about people based on events that long ago, as well as
unbelievable importance of Christianity,
or at least
the benefits of civilizational Christianity,
it might be a good idea to actually look at all the data. We have to admit that for over 1,000 years, from the Battle of the Yarmouk River, which overturned our understanding of the world, to the Siege of Vienna, when we finally found our confidence, thanks largely to our friend Polish King Jan Sobieski, whom we met in the previous video, Islam, its civilization, and its empires were the closest thing we ever had to the sum of our fears.
From dust.
The point is, there are many phobias embedded in our historical memory.
Who is the loved one? Who is Ar-Rahman? Who is Al-Mannan?
However,
there is and has never been any Islamic equivalent to the Easter story. There are no Muslim equivalents to men like Constantine, Theodosius, Justinian, and John Chrysostomos, or others who created what we call political Christianity. There are no Muslim equivalents to what today we call the deicide libel, the idea that it was the Jews who killed the Messiah, the guilt for which they transferred, knowingly and consciously, to their descendants. The mother of all Western anti-Semitic theories, arguably the origin story for Western antisemitism, because as we all know, stories matter, even when we know they aren't true. Nobody in Islam ever put an asterisk around the Jewish community the way Christian civilization once did. It didn't happen as the Islamic world. We aren't saying there was never persecution, or that every caliph or sultan was tolerant and wise, nor that the Arab Empire was somehow more benevolent or appreciative of diversity than the Roman and Persian empires. We are merely saying that the creators of political Islam, the first four caliphs, for example, faced a totally different set of political circumstances and strategic challenges than the creators of political Christianity. Contrary to what most Westerners grew up believing, Islam was never spread by the sword. It didn't need to be, because the Arab Empire was. Political Christianity had intolerance for religious dissent and diversity baked into its DNA, because it was grafted onto the political narrative of an empire created by pagans, which was, by the 4th century, on the rocks. If your legitimacy as a ruler depends in large part on your status as defender of the faith, then it's probably going to be important for you that as many people as possible actually practice that faith, and as uniformly as possible. Alexander never had that problem, nor Caesar, nor Abu Bakr, and the vast majority of the caliphs who established the traditions and cultures and norms of political Islam. That had consequences for Jews, but also for many others. Why did the 20th century fascists obsess with Jews and not Cathars or Muslims? Many reasons. But one is that by the time fascism came around, Cathars and Muslims had long been extinguished from Europe, with the exception of tiny and insignificant pockets in the Balkans. Unlike political Christianity, the Arab Empire and political Islam were created by people who already were Muslim. It needed Islam for coherence, but not for legitimacy, because the conquests themselves gave it legitimacy. That meant its relationship with non-Muslims, Jews, Copts, Nestorians, Maronites, Syriac Christians, and others, was totally different than these people's same relationship with the Roman Empire under political Christianity. That's why the so-called people of the book, who were legally classified as dhimmis, an Arabic word which does not mean what many Westerners think it means, enjoyed freedoms that they did not enjoy even when they were ruled by fellow Judean Christians in Constantinople. Ask ChatGPT to list the greatest non-religious intellectuals in history. In science, secular philosophy, historians, mathematicians, physicians, and look for the Jewish names. When do they appear? They start appearing in the 8th century, and none are Ashkenazi until the 19th. What were all the Einsteins and Freuds and Bohrs doing all those years before the birth of political Islam? In 1150, when Jewish physician, philosopher, and polymath known to Greek speakers as Maimonides, arguably the Aristotle of the Middle Ages, fled Cordoba, he settled in Cairo, then known as Fustat, where Maimonides completed his greatest life's work. And in 1187, when Salahuddin reconquered Jerusalem, or liberated it, depending on your point of view, Maimonides showed no interest in either returning to the Promised Land, nor leading his people out of Egypt back to it. Despite being the Nagid of all the Jews of Egypt, probably 20 to 40,000 people, more than enough for a sustainable new community, despite his name in Hebrew literally being Moshe or Moses, and despite, as personal physician to Salahuddin's wazir in Fustat,
I will send you my physicians. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam.
and highly respected leader in all of Egypt's intellectual community, he would have been in the perfect position to pitch a win-win resettlement plan to Salahuddin's dynasty, in the same way that influential Jews in London like Sir Moses Montefiore and Lord Rothschild did in the 19th century. First to the Ottoman Empire, which Montefiore allegedly did directly to the Sultan and Caliph himself, and then to the British Empire. But somehow, despite the supposed ancestral longing we are led to believe can never be extinguished, neither he nor anyone else ever did. In 1492, when the Sephardim were expelled from Spain, they went to Algiers, Tunis, Alexandria, Cairo, and especially to the cities of the Ottoman Empire: Constantinople, Thessaloniki, Smyrna, Adrianople, everywhere in the Muslim world except Jerusalem, even though there was nothing stopping them. To be clear, some did. There were migrants who set up religious schools and communities. People did do aliyah. It's just that the interest in the Promised Land was not what a modern person, including many Jews, is led to believe.
If Israel didn't have a strong state, then the fate of the Jews who lived in Israel would be exactly what happened on the 7th of October.
That's Australian legal legend Mark Liebler, Companion of the Order of Australia, and eponymous founder of one of the most prestigious law firms in Australia. And when he says that, I wonder what he makes of the fact that for the over 13 centuries between the Arab victory at Yarmouk and the British victory at Megiddo, at which the Australian Light Brigades played such an important part, there was a continuous Jewish presence in Palestine, despite no nuclear-armed Jewish ethno-state, backstopped by the blood and treasure of the world's only superpower to protect them. In fact, we can go even further than that and say that for the 23 centuries between the founding of Alexandria and the establishment of the State of Israel, there would have been very few when the Jewish population of Alexandria, where the Torah was first translated and then later Cairo, was smaller than the Jewish population of Jerusalem, at least outside the high holidays. And for almost all that time, Alexandria and Jerusalem were subject to the same political authority. Yet there was never a mass movement to return. So this modern idea...
Great clash, it has to be said, really, between the fundamental values of the West and radical Islam in particular.
So central to our conceptions about the Middle East and our conflicts here in Australia.
Would the history of Christianity been more bloody or less bloody if Jesus had been more like Muhammad?
Of a primitive, hateful society.
What does Jesus say when the crowd wanted to stone her for her sins? He says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone."
Why do I have this feeling that if Mr. Murray had actually been at that scene, he would have looked Jesus straight in the eyes and said, "I say, screw that." Whatever. We aren't here to talk about Mr. Murray.
The point is that this image we have in our head of Islamic society and Muslim culture and people, undeveloped even in basic human emotions like empathy, sympathy, and compassion.
Muslims do not love other Muslims. They have no love for them. They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None.
Existentially prone to superstition, violence, and cruelty, whose motivations are not the normal motivations one might expect from someone like you or me, but instead are driven only by an irrational, unexplainable, atavistic hatred which can't be reasoned with or understood.
What do they mind? One thing: Jews living.
And it is that irrational, primal hatred, as pointless as it is suicidal, which drove Jews from their homeland and prevented them from returning, like salmon swimming back to the waters where they spawned. But for the establishment of Israel and its military domination over the Arab world,
Jews living and Jews winning.
Because that's all they have to live for.
It hits them deep in their soul, in their psyche.
All that is fiction.
Think about it like an intellectual disease that's built into the foundations of the civilization that we live in.
Ahistorical nonsense.
It's like, it's this irrational hatred, but it is so, so deep because it goes back to the most important myth that Western civilization is built on. And
in short, the anger we are dealing with today in society, from Muslims, migrants, and not just Muslims and migrants, has many sources. Yes, it can and does spill into antisemitism. But of all the sources we need to worry about, cultural DNA is not one of them.
These are politically determined. They're not simply because that's the way Arabs are. Right. That's the way Muslims are. And it's that racist discourse that I think is part of what makes it so hard for us to imagine that equality actually could make us safe.
So to see that more than double in just 5 years is shocking.
All forms of racism are interconnected. And what this means in terms of government responses is that instead of law and order approaches, we support those that oppose all forms of racism, which don't create hierarchies of racism and which target systemic and structural discrimination.
The safety and thriving and liberation of Jews and Muslims is bound up together. It is just patently true, and it's true in Israel and Palestine, and it's true in New York City.
The Jewish Council is deeply concerned about rises in anti-Semitism in Australia, which is part of a broader increase in racism that includes Islamophobia, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Asian racism, and anti-Palestinian racism. And we're especially concerned about the rise of far-right extremism. We consider that the only way for us to effectively fight anti-Semitism is by working in partnership with other groups also facing bigotry and discrimination.
It's been incredibly disappointing to see some groups, politicise this moment and straight away start blaming other racialised groups.
The opportunity we have in this general election to build a coalition of New Yorkers who understand what inclusive multiracial democracy could look like and do it with the joy that was in his campaign and our cross endorsement, I think is a great opportunity for how to stand up to fascism.
It is incredibly powerful to see so many young people waking up, asking questions, young and old people.
The Empire did nothing wrong.
Asda will graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering, Molecular and Cellular Engineering, and a minor in resistance to genocide.
The liberal media is not going to tell you that.
You may not know this, but ASNA is USC's 2024 valedictorian.
World didn't give it to me. World didn't give it. World didn't take it away.
It
was a Sage quote said, never let anyone tell you who your enemy is. Don't let them tell you that people who are protesting a genocide are your enemy.
Andrew Cuomo went into a synagogue in this race and called me and Zoran and the black speaker of the city council anti-Semitic.
They don't give a shit.
Fairly highly educated class of Jewish city dwellers, and most of them rent.
You have people that are in control of large groups of people that convince these people that these other large groups of people that they don't even know are their enemies.
There's a class divide among Jews.
The enemies are the ones who are telling you that the students protesting for peace, protesting against the genocide,
they are happy to use us as pawns for their own political purposes.
Why do you call yourselves the Jewish Council of Australia?
The only Jewish safety that's important is Zionist Jewish safety.
You're emotionally damaged, Jewishly.
The ones telling you that these people are your enemy are the real enemies.
Don't for it.
We've got people in our country who hate our country. Thank you.